I'm Dustin Abbott, and last night America rendered their final verdict after a long contentious presidential election. And so I thought it was appropriate that today I render my final verdict on a camera that has also had its share of controversy, and that is the new Canon 5D Mark IV. The 5D series, of course, is Canon's probably most beloved camera series, in that it has become the staple for both enthusiasts and professionals that don't need or want the bigger, heavier 1D series bodies. And so there is, of course, a lot that's resting upon Canon's success with the 5D Mark IV. If you haven't already been following my coverage of the 5D Mark IV, I have a whole playlist of videos. You can take a look at that here, and in that list of playlists, I cover various strengths and weaknesses of the camera. I look at its sensor performance, for example, its dynamic range and its performance at high ISO, its overall resolution. I have a video segment where I look at the video quality and I break that down, both its strengths and weaknesses. And of course, it's the video aspect of the camera that has been really its most controversial. And so if you have questions that are specific to any of those areas, I would encourage you to take a look at those videos, because I'm certainly not going to cover any of those things really in much detail here. I didn't realize that the 5D Mark IV would be so controversial. In fact, I made a video segment the day that it was officially announced, and a segment about why I was pre-ordering one and why I was so happy about the spec list. And I'm not typically one of the controversial reviewers here on YouTube, but on that day I was controversial, and I had a lot of people that were essentially calling me an idiot for wasting my money on the 5D Mark IV. But the reason why I pre-ordered it is when I looked at the spec list, and as a very experienced photographer that gets to use a whole lot of gear, I've shot with a lot of cameras and obviously with a whole lot of lenses, I have a very good sense of what I want in a camera. And I looked at the spec list of the 5D Mark IV, and for me, the majority of the boxes were ticked off. And so at that stage, really all I wanted to see is if Canon actually delivered on the promises of the spec list. And so I pre-ordered with the expectation that historically Canon has done a pretty good job of delivering on its specifications. And I'm happy to say, after now spending 2 months with the 5D Mark IV, that I believe that Canon has done just that. And despite it not being a perfect camera, it is my favorite camera that I've used to this point, and I'd like to take a few minutes to detail why. The 5D series has always been a great ergonomic series, and of course it is a little bit larger and heavier than the Rebel series or even the XXD line, but at the same time this current model has actually shaved off a few ounces, so it's a little bit lighter while still having a very robust magnesium alloy sealed body. And it's worth noting that over at Lens Rentals, they've already broken down a 5D Mark IV and checked out its innards and reported back that it was more heavily engineered and better internally sealed than 5D series bodies to date. So that's certainly very positive, and the ergonomics on the camera are fantastic. They've always been good, but the addition of a very responsive touchscreen has taken that to a whole new level. If you haven't used a camera with a touchscreen, you don't really realize all the different ways that it's super helpful, even down to navigating menus or pinching and expanding images when reviewing. You know, right now if I do a calibration, rather than having to fiddle with knobs on the back, I can use touchscreen to enter values, and it certainly is far more intuitive and much quicker. And so you find when you're going back to cameras that don't have a touchscreen, you know, I've got a Canon 6D here in front of me. Frankly, it's somewhat disappointing to go back to using it without that touchscreen. And so the handling is really overall improved on the 5D Mark IV, and it's a great camera to use. The one thing that I would have liked to have seen to further help that handling in a lot of situations is having an articulating screen like the 80D does, for example. And that's just a really helpful thing, not only for video functionality, but when you need to shoot high angles or shoot very low. There's just a lot of situations where I enjoy having the articulating screen. Canon elected to not go with it on the 5D Mark IV. I think it sounds like it's fairly possible that it may show up on the 6D Mark II, or at least a tilting screen. And so anyway, but I really do like the handling of the 5D Mark IV. Although it hasn't gotten really talked about a whole lot, actually the autofocus system is a huge, huge upgrade. Now on paper, it doesn't seem like it's a whole lot different than the 5D Mark III, but even with the 5D SR, and if you haven't seen my review of that as an alternative to the 5D Mark IV, you can check out my 5D SR review here. The 5DSR already had an improved focus system with the addition of a much broader zone metering that allowed it to have more accurate focus. The 5D Mark IV has that, but it actually has a second dedicated Digic 6 processor that is all dedicated to autofocus. And so as a result, seems to be just more voltage going through it. And I find that all of my lenses, and I've got a lot of lenses, and of course I test a lot of lenses, but I find that all the lenses seem a little bit snappier and a little bit more responsive on the 5D Mark IV. Furthermore, I found that lenses where I couldn't really be confident going out to the outer points, say third-party lenses, for example, I find that I just have more confidence in going out and basically just putting autofocus where I want. And so it's certainly very improved in that. The autofocus is really exceptional in the 5D Mark IV. On top of that, while Canon has experimented with autofocus at a maximum aperture of f8 before, and most notably it added on a center point f8 autofocus onto the 5D Mark III through firmware. And then, in slightly expanded stages, we have seen f8 functionality up to where the 80D had fairly decent coverage of, I think, around 25 AF points at f8. But I own an 80D, and I extensively tested that with the 100 to 400 millimeter f2 f4.5 to 5.6 L Mark II, and then Canon's Mark III 1.4 times teleconverter. And I found that it did fairly well using a single point. It did really well with the center point, but if you used any kind of group or zone focus, that it wasn't quite as accurate. I think that Canon has really kind of figured out the tech with enabling f8 autofocus, because the 5D Mark IV just seems to be able to just do it. It doesn't done any kind of hunting or pulsing. And furthermore, all of the 63 AF points are fully enabled and usable with that combination. And so autofocus with that is just fantastic. Tracking is very good with the camera. And of course, it adds on Canon's exceptional DPAF technology. And of course, I've been using DPAF with a number of other camera bodies in the past. I own both a 70D and an 80D, but DPAF is fantastic. And if you've never had a chance to use it, and it's not just great for video, it's actually good for stills as well. And particularly if you're working on a tripod, DPAF is fantastic. Just touch where you want it to focus and boom, it's just that fast. And so it's really impressive in how quickly it can accomplish that. And so overall, the autofocus is a huge pro for the 5D Mark IV. On top of that, the image quality is certainly improved. And one of the reasons why I have a very popular article that I wrote years ago about why I chose the 6D over the 5D Mark III. And the primary reason for that was that I felt that the 6D offered up the superior image quality in a lot of different situations. And that was very important to me. And so I'm very happy to say that the 5D Mark IV, I've done a lot of head-to-head testing, and I'm happy to say that it has surpassed the 6D's image quality really in every facet. It has noticeably superior dynamic range, so much so that I'm finding that it's very, very rare to be in a situation where I feel like I need to do HDR and exposure bracketing. And I find that when I have bracketed exposures and then just processed a single exposure, that I'm really able to get as good, if not a better result, because of the downsides of exposure bracketing, little shifts of movement, ghosting here or there, I'm actually able to produce a better result, often with a single RAW file, than what I am able to do through HDR. And I can't say that that's been true of any Canon camera that I've used before. And so I'm really enjoying the added latitude for processing. And I demonstrated in the high ISO setting that used right, you can get fantastic results at high ISO settings. As far as the resolution goes, a lot of people complained about the 5D Mark IV having an AA filter. And the truth of the matter is that if you want the absolute greatest sharpness, the 5DSR is still a better choice than the 5D Mark IV. That being said, I found that I'm able to get amazingly crisp, sharp results with the 5D Mark IV. I have had to approach processing a little bit differently because I found that files can bear a little bit more sharpening. And so, but the bottom line is that I'm getting great results out of my RAWs in terms of resolution. And now that I have the JPEG engine tweaked, and you have more flexibility in being able to tweak the settings in the JPEG engine, I'm getting really fantastic looking JPEGs that I just love them right out of camera, and they seem to require very little processing. So I still shoot almost exclusively RAW, but I find that periodically I'm throwing some JPEGs in there just because in certain situations I like the look that I can get right out of camera. And so in some situations where I'm not wanting to post-process or don't have time to do that, I'm finding that I'm quite happy with the added latitude even of JPEG files, where there's a lot more latitude for processing than what I found with the JPEG files out of the 5D Mark III or Canon 6D. So I'm really happy overall with all of those things. And of course, the flip side of having the AA filter is that I found that the 5D Mark IV does a better job in suppressing moire patterning during video production than any Canon camera that I've used before. And so it does a great job when it comes to that. Video quality, and I have an episode where I hit that extensively, so if you really want to focus on video quality, take a look at that. But I will say that, of course, this is a place where there's been a lot of controversy about the 5D Mark IV, and a lot of talk about its implementation of 4K video and the motion JPEG codec, all of those things, which I'm not trying to take away from any of those things. My biggest complaint about the video performance is the fact that it takes a huge amount of storage space, and I have 64 gig cards in the camera. I'm looking at moving up to a 256 gig card. For one thing, if you move up to that size of card, it eliminates, it switches to an exFAT processing or exFAT file system, which means that you don't have the 4 gig file limitations, which is kind of a pain in video use. So, but that being said, the motion JPEG codec does use a ton of space. But I do like the way that the footage looks, and so I'm enjoying having the option of shooting 4K when I want to. But beyond that, most of my shooting is 1080p. It's what I'm shooting right now with the Canon 5D Mark IV, and its 1080p performance is really gorgeous. Very much more detailed, crisp, and the video quality just looks very good. And so I'm actually quite happy with it. And whereas for my channel and most of my video use, I was sticking with the 80D before, I find now that I'm far more likely to reach for a 5D Mark IV because it's got all of the versatility of the 80D, save the articulating screen, but it has, that superior image quality. On top of that, it also has the option of shooting HDR video, which in certain situations is beneficial, giving you more kind of latitude again there for processing it and color grading it. And then, of course, it does have the ability to shoot time lapses in camera and automatically converts those into movies, and I'm having a lot of fun playing with it. The other thing that I am finding about the 5D Mark IV is that it is a bit of a battery hog. Certainly, if you're shooting 4K video, you may find that you run out of battery space before you run out of memory card space. And beyond that, I find that, not to say it's burning through batteries quickly, but I do find that I need to charge batteries more often with the 5D Mark IV compared to any full-frame Canon DSLR that I've used before. I think it's probably because of the additional tech that's on board, the 5D Mark IV, along with the fact that it's running multiple processors. And for example, I certainly use the GPS. I find it very beneficial to have my images geotagged, and so I use the GPS I use it in the mode 2, so it's not draining battery all the time. But that being said, when the camera's on, GPS is draining some battery life. Of course, it's got Wi-Fi, things like that that certainly are come at a battery life cost. And so I think having a backup battery or two is probably a good idea if you're going to shoot extensively with the 5D Mark IV. The only other real negative that I can point to is the price. And while the price is fairly similar in the US market at $34.99 for it, in most other markets around the world, we're finding that it's coming at a considerably higher cost premium. And here in Canada, the list price is more like $4,500, plus 13% sales tax. And so a lot of people are feeling kind of the sticker shock of such a high-priced item. And that's been true, unfortunately, of most of Canon's recent releases. Their lenses, their cameras, they're just coming in at a price that is higher than what we want to pay. And so I certainly understand if you want to hold off or wait on the 5D Mark IV. And I, to be honest, I hesitated pulling the trigger even though I had been saving and setting aside the money and I had it ready to pay for the camera. But having purchased it for myself, I'm happy that I did it. It is, I've enjoyed shooting with the 5D Mark IV more than any camera before. I'm really thrilled with the images that I'm getting, and I do feel that I'm able to get images and also capture them in a way that is helping my workflow and improving the quality of the work that I'm able to produce. So bottom line, that's a big deal for me. And so when it comes to the end of the day, I find that just as I felt when I looked at that spec list, that the 5D Mark IV is just about right. I really like the size of the files in that 30.6 megapixels is kind of a perfect sweet spot for me. And I've also found that the 17 megapixel medium raw setting is another one that is a go-to for me, particularly in high ISO situations. I like the JPEG quality, and for me the 7 frames per second is certainly a fast enough burst speed, and it has a nice shutter mechanism, and so all of those things are very good for me. As far as the burst rate, when you have good cards in there like I do in the CF card that I've got in there right now, which is a Lexar Professional, it's a 1066 times. And so I find with that in optimal situations I can shoot 34 full raw images before the buffer fills. That's more than what I'll ever use. And if you need more than that, then you need to look at something like a 1D series or like a 7D Mark II. But beyond that, it's certainly meeting my purposes for the limited amount of wildlife and sports that I shoot. It's plenty for me. And I suspect that it'll be very rare that I even fill up that much of a buffer space. And so overall, I know that many of you would like me to rant, but I like the camera. I'm enjoying using it, and if you can afford the upgrade and feel like it suits your shooting style, it's a fantastic camera. It has some limitations, yes, but don't they all? I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look down below, you can see linkage to all kinds of coverage of this, including my full written review, an image gallery full of all kinds of different images that I've been taking with the 5D Mark IV, some 4K screen grabs, that kind of stuff that's all there. And of course, there's a link there if you would like to purchase one for yourself. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.